This morning, I'm going to let Joel introduce Mark Anderson. And Joel?
Thanks, Brad. I had not met Mark before today, and I just want to say Mark is who I want to be when I grow up. And this man has the unique distinction of having predicted both the terrible economic crisis that we confronted in 2008 and the drop in oil prices. And I don't know anybody else who can make that claim. So that in itself is very impressive. And I told him that what I'm going to do is read the short bio that he gave me, just because I couldn't possibly commit it all to memory before this talk, much as I don't want to take time away from hearing him, so I'm going to read fast. Mark is founder and CEO of the Strategic News Service, and he's chair of the Future in Review Conference. He's publisher of SNS Global Report on Tech and the Economy, which is read by everyone you know, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Vint Cerf, all your other friends. He's founder and chair of Future in Review Conference, which has been called the best technology conference in the world by The Economist. His work includes the creation of Project Inkwell, the first global consortium of vendors to bring educators, students, and others together to talk about technology in the classroom. He SNS Interactive News, using patented processes to bring daily interactive communications worldwide about leaders and for leaders, a new global rescue system for victims of human trafficking in concert with Julia Ormond's asset program, the Orca Relief Citizens Alliance, the sole nonprofit organization working to reduce killer whale mortality rates, and nutritional microanalysis, which is a new field of medical research and practice aimed at connecting biochemical descriptions of food with health. And Mark is credited with accelerating the development of 3G wireless in Iceland, helping design Sweden's wireless auction process, assisting Eastern Germany's technology programs, creating the first post-9/11 manual for the U.S. government on the use of technology to combat terror, and being the first to fully document the central role of stolen intellectual property in China's national business model. His successful predictions include the great financial collapse of late 2007, which he made in March of that year on CNBC's Europe's Power Lunch, the contemporary outbreak of currency wars and the first modern use of the term, the advent and success of the carry-along computer category in 1997 as the fastest growing and largest in the industry, now represented by pads and notebooks, and the first detailed description of the Internet Assistant category, Siri, Google Now, and Dragon Go, and the global currency crisis of late 97, leading to a publicly graded 94.5% prediction accuracy record since 1995. And he's the only person to have publicly predicted both the GFC and the oil price collapse, the two most important economic events of this century. He's founder and CEO of INVNT, Inventing Nations versus Nation-Sponsored Theft of IP, consisting of a global consortium of corporations and a global network of government leaders at cabinet level and above, as a result of his discovery of the infomercantilist national business model and its connection to IP theft. He has briefed the NSA, the White House, the CIA, FBI, GCHQ, MI5, BIS, Cabinet Minister's Office, and the Australian government. His intellectual contributions include resonance theory, the first physics theory of everything, based on the resonant properties of empty space, the aorta, the always-on real-time access concept, subsequently taken as the name for Europe's first broadband network, the Inkwell Manifesto. Hey, you know, and so now we'll move on to our next speaker. Anyhow, you can see why I want to be Mark Anderson when I grow up. I give you Mark Anderson.
Thank you, Joel. Thanks very much.
Before we go, I want to thank Joel for choosing the short version of the bio.
The short version of the bio.
Mark?
Thank you very much. So I think I'm going to stand for a little bit while we do this, then I'll come in. Well, I think the speech is done. Basically, you've already heard the reason I'm here this morning is to talk to you mostly about IP protection, how it might apply to you in your own work, and maybe some views of it that you don't have yet. When we started looking at this, it was by accident. And I started looking at Japan and their currency manipulation techniques back in '95 for financial reasons. We started looking at China's national business model switch around 2000. And little by little, we kind of backed into a rather terrifying view of the national business model of China. And people were complaining about, cyber problems and security issues. And make a long story short, we figured it out pretty well. And we've actually just completed a project, a year-long project, which we haven't announced yet, and I'm not going to announce it today. But it's done. And it has to do with this issue. So I think we are the most advanced in our understanding of this question of anybody in the world. And for that reason, we've had the luxury of being able to brief people, like Joel said, around the world who are kind of cabinet level and above on the reason that this is an economic issue, not a direct military or security or diplomatic or commercial or all the other things that people thought it was. And we seem to have wide agreement. So we've had great success in talking to all those folks, saying that your silo is a great silo. Nice work. By the way, while you were doing all that great work, this problem was ramping to the sky. So clearly you didn't solve it. So what can we do to solve it? And the only answer really, which I'll come back to at the end of this little conversation, is economic. If you have an economically caused problem, you're not going to solve it with better cyber techniques. You're going to solve it with an economically related solution. So that's our work in INVNT IP. And that group consists of major corporations around the world. We don't name them. They're all black, with one exception, Google. Sergey Brin, who was the first guy to stand up and with the courage to stand up after the Aurora attacks, is happy that we mention Google every time we talk about INVNT IP. Everybody else is black. And you know why they're black? Sure you do. Because there are consequences in this business. So we would like to have all of you join INVNT IP, and when you do, you'll all be black. No one will know you belong, and no name of yours or of your company will ever appear anywhere on any C drive, I guarantee it. So that's the work we're doing. We think it's pretty important work. I'm understating it. We think that this problem, as an economic problem, if it doesn't get fixed, everybody loses. All of you lose. And all of America loses. And all of the countries we call inventing nations lose. So we actually have a different view of the world than you probably have or had before I ran up here. We look at it very simple. We don't care what politics people have. There's no left. There's no right. None of that matters. What matters is what's the business model of that country. And there are only two business models today. You invent things or you steal them. Copy them. Or force their disclosure. So here's the problem. If you're a nation with 1.3 billion people, and I'll say this clearly right now, we are not anti-China. We love China. We are anti-business model. We hate that business model that says steal all the IP of the world and then sell it back at half price in a global marketplace. We don't think that's good for anybody, including those who do it. Short term, yes. Long term, no. It is not a long-term win for anybody. You get rich in the short term, everyone's poor in the long term. So the problem, which is where I wanted to start, if you want to define the problem, that's the problem. And you'll face it in your own work through a variety of ways. And I'll briefly run through them. You probably know them all already. So cyber is one. About 10% to 20% of the problems are cyber. People think it's bigger than that. It is growing. If you think, as the head of MI5 said back in 2007, if you think you haven't been penetrated, you have. The only question is whether you know it. We have the biggest problem I think we have is CEO denial. So do we have any CEOs in the room? Raise your hand. You guys are the problem. And what I mean by that is, for all, probably all the usual American reasons of quarterly reporting and so forth, the CSOs of the world, when you survey them, they say, 80% say, we're not spending enough money on this. We're not solving the problem. Our company is at risk. The CEOs go, things are great. We're fine. We've spent enough money. Budget's good. We're covered. There's no penetration. And if you do the double, we call it a double pie. So 90% of the attacks go unnoticed. That leaves you 10% known. Of the 100% of those, only 10% get reported by the CEOs. So we have the best database, I think, anywhere. You can go to inventip.com with no E in it, and you'll see it, of all the attacks, all the thefts of state nature of your stuff. And we figure that's about 1%. It's a big list, but that's only 1% of what's happened. So there's the problem. Once you realize that this isn't just a harassment thing or some bad guys in an otherwise great nation, or this is the national business model run by 7 guys in the standing committee. Verizon says 96% of the thefts are China. We think it's 80 to 90, but it's changing. Russia's stepping up their game. And so we're not picking out China. China's picking out itself. This is a business model run from the top down with all the moving parts top to bottom that are necessary in what we call infomercantilism. So it takes all the way back to the British East Indies. This is an old idea, but now with information, with ideas, with inventions, you steal them, we call it SAD. You steal them, you amplify them, and then you dominate global markets. And you don't need to trust me on this if you know the name Nortel or Motorola or DuPont. I mean, there are thousands of companies now that have been harmed, and some entire sectors, companies have been destroyed, not harmed, destroyed, and sectors have been destroyed. The sale of Alcatel-Lucent's structure business last week is just the latest chapter in watching the entire structure collapse in that marketplace. Huawei now has 60% of that market. So this is a very effective model, by the way. It works. You can't run, you can't hide. There is no way to compete if you... Michael Dell is a friend of mine. I think, this is my opinion, the reason he went private isn't just because he doesn't like public meetings. He was able, by going private, to compete with Lenovo, who's now number 1. They were 0, now they're number 1, because their operating margins in the PC business were 1%. And there's no way to be a CEO and come to Wall Street every quarter and say 1%. You'd be fired from a public company. So guess what? He's not a public company anymore. Literally, by going private, he can now compete effectively with a Chinese company that's state-owned, partly state-owned. So this is the problem. It's a big problem. And no matter who you are, if you're working in things that have to do with IP, and I want to do one more little, we're going to do a 20-minute thing, by the way. 20 minutes for me, 20 minutes of us two talking, and then 20 minutes with you. So you have plenty of chances to ask questions. We define IP not the way a lawyer would. So if there are lawyers in the crowd, God bless you, but we probably disagree about what IP is. We think that IP isn't just patents and trademarks, copyrights. IP is whatever it is in your business that you put behind closed doors to maintain a differentiable competitive advantage. That's IP. It could be a process for making an airplane. It could be a chip design. It could be a letter to your lawyer. It could be a bid number. That's IP. It's a secret. It's a trade secret that lets you win in competition. That's what gets stolen. This has nothing to do with law. This is all about economic value of knowledge. So that's what's at risk. Companies don't even know. We use the term crown jewel IP. Companies don't even know what that is. I think it's a safe bet to make with any of you. If I said, here's an unlimited amount of money, but you have a problem. Your challenge is identify the crown jewel IP in your company and put it in this box. They literally don't know what they've got. They don't know, we're all smart kids, right? They don't know who knows what. What's the secret that Joe knows that Frank doesn't know? Is it on the hard drive or not on the hard? Is it on a thumb drive? Where is it? They literally don't know. So the first step, obviously, is to identify what you've got. There are a lot of questions about how to behave when you travel. I think you've heard this, but I'll just tell you. We worked with the CIA for 2 years to develop an understanding of what people should do when they travel, if they're business people. So you know this, and I bet none of you are doing it. How many people went to China in the last 5 years? Okay, almost all, say 60%. Well, and how many of you, be honest, how many of you went without your phone and without your computer, your laptop, and just went to Best Buy and bought a clean machine and went with that? You should. Yeah, you did the right thing. Okay, so what company do you work for? Well done. You get the gold star on the refrigerator. Well, so thanks for being honest. No one does it. We kind of know it, but we don't do it. It's a hassle. I could bore you by telling you, or excite you by telling you all the various stories that I know of about how to take stuff off that stuff. But before you even get through customs, it's already over often. So don't think you're being the smart guy by watching your phone the whole time or hiding it someplace or putting it in the safe. I just saw a very disturbing film of some guys coming into a hotel room and literally flipping the room. They took all the electronics, they just took them out. So you just understand, go to China, be engaged with China, but understand what you're doing because their game is clear. This is their national business model. This isn't just like a couple of bad guys. You will be stripped. You may or may not know it, but you will certainly be stripped. There's a flip side to this, and there are some new laws that China just passed that made it more public. But when Chinese people come away from their country, they're briefed. They each have a meeting. Tourists, students, interns, graduate students, employees, researchers, academics, they all get a little meeting with the Ministry of Information saying, by the way, while you're in Chicago, there's a guy named so-and-so there who's pretty interested in something or other. If you learn something that would help the motherland, we'd love to hear about it. No big pressure. But if they really want to know, they put big pressure on you. So it's hard. It's very hard for the people of China. I mean, you want your grandmother killed or put in jail? I don't. So it's very hard for people to work with this system. We're not, and again, we're not saying the people are at risk or at fault here. We're saying that the system, the business model, is the focus. Anyhow, that means if you're an employer, or you're running Cambridge University, or make a list. So the head of MI5 or ex-head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, is a friend of ours. He tells a story about, he's from Cambridge. He's a master at Cambridge. He went to the guys at Cambridge when he was running. He was M, right? The guy, James Bond. And he said, look, we know the guys. We can tell you who they are. We know that they're spies. We know who the handler is. Some of these are registered as students. Some are not. They're all over Cambridge. We know what they're after. You have to do something. He said, no, we're at a university. So we have a difficult cultural conversation about these things because if you're American or if you're a free market person or if you believe in an open world, that's great. God bless you, but that's not the team you're playing against. I have another friend who runs a chip company, and he was about to go over to Beijing, and he said, in these days, it's open source. That's yesterday. We're a globalized world now. We're going to go over there and do business. I said, well, that's fantastic that you feel that way. It's too bad the other guys don't feel like you feel, because they're playing for their country, and you're not. You're not playing the same game of poker. So it's not really about him. It's really about not being wise enough to know how things work. So we'll get down to the what do you do, and then we'll talk more about what do you do, I think. But how do you solve this problem? Well, you all know that, no offense, but Symantec, if you're here, it isn't going to solve it for you, and it's old. They came out publicly and said that, so it's not me. Firewalls don't work. I think a year ago or 2 years ago, it was safe. I was saying, and I think it was true, no one in this room would be able to protect themselves from an APT, from an advanced persistent threat attack. When the Chinese PLA wants to get into your company, they get in. Period. You couldn't buy, there's nothing you'd buy that would solve that problem. So you're sitting ducks. You're literally just going to be a victim. It's changing now. So there now is a new understanding, and there are lots of new startups, new approaches to security which are better. But none of them work without people. Right? So there are going to be two final answers to this. A, buy the new stuff because it actually does work better. It does see regular usage on your network and detects the things which are irregular. It notices patterns. It helps you see things that you would never have seen otherwise. It can identify an individual device which is being attacked, and turn it off. So there is better software today than there was before, and I would say go get it. More important is the people part. Both who do you hire, who do you trust, what kind of policies do you have? So identify your crown jewels, put them in a shoebox, a server somewhere. To the degree that you can, of course, create an air gap. That's what the smart guys do. It's a hassle. Do it. If you're Boeing and you've got the design for the next Dreamliner, don't put it all on a server where someone can just go get it. And by the way, people are pretty, I don't know, confident, arrogant. We had a guy from Ford. So the Ford CIO for Europe. We had a very big meeting with Accenture in London, public. We're training everybody about stuff. Here's how to avoid the problem. And the Ford guy says, well, we don't count. This meeting isn't for us because we're Ford. We ship a car or a truck. They buy it the first day. They tear it apart. We're done. They've got our secrets. So I shouldn't even be in this room. About 2 weeks later, a Chinese guy walked out of Ford in Southern California with 10,000 pages of documents on the drivetrain. He was wrong. So if you think your stuff doesn't matter, why don't you quit and go on vacation? Because it does matter, and the guy who replaces you will do a better job protecting your crown jewels. If you don't have crown jewels, you're not in business. So don't tell yourself you don't have any, because that's what keeps you in business. You just have to identify them. They're not easy to identify all the time. One more story. I have a friend who I work with at Cal IT2 in San Diego. He has a med device company, and they got caught. They've caught the guy. He's on his way to the airport. It's a typical Motorola-like story. They catch the guy. They arrest him. They convict him. He's got a leg thing on now. And in the briefcase, they thought they were going to find all their device blueprints. No, not really. There were a few. They found all these operating manuals. Really? They didn't know that was IP. They had no idea that was of interest to China. But it turns out that China had already gotten smart, very smart guys. They had already realized if you just steal the products without knowing how to run the company, you're toast. It doesn't work. You have to know both. So after you've stolen the blueprints for everything, you still have to steal the operating plans, because that's where, who to hire, what skill set, what job do you do, who reports to whom. That's just as important as the stuff you make. So we all have IP. It's all crown jewel IP somewhere or other. Figure out what it is, put it onto a server someplace else, create an air gap, buy the right software, and then, by the way, you don't have to have 10,000 employees accessing that box. There are probably 8 of them that really need to see that, and then they can decide who the next 8 are and so on. Make it hard. Don't make it easy, make it hard. We've spent almost our entire lives building out the internet and making things easy in terms of access, and that was brilliant for the inventing nations. Unfortunately, it was even more brilliant for nations who are infomercantilists. We paved a golden highway without even having to get on a jet, so they can come over here and take your stuff and then bring it back. Process it through their system, subsidize it, give it taxings, preferred purchase, and make it the biggest company in the world, bigger than you, before it even leaves China, and then come back into the global marketplace like Huawei has done and drive you out of business. So don't let that happen. That's the short part of this conversation. It's not intended to be cheerful, but if you all are still here 10 years from now, it will have worked. So I think at this point we should talk about other things.
Actually, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about what you just said.
Okay.
We're going to throw away these other questions that I have
all right.
for you. Not everybody is familiar with the history of infomercantilism.
Yes.
With that.
It's a hard word. Infomercantilism.
And so can you talk about Japan to South Korea to China, what Japan did to us, what South Korea did to Japan, and what's happened to South Korea?
Yeah. So in the 70s and 80s, people probably remember, pretty old crowd here, Japan, through various techniques, some of which were legal. We brought a lot of stuff to Japan as partners with them, but also they stole a lot of stuff. So there were about 5 big industries that they decided to focus upon. And when I say decide, now we're talking about that model. So government works with industry. They have an industrial policy. That policy has targets in it. Japan had 5 major targets. By the way, we have just published the list of the Chinese targets, and there are 402. Scale, right? Scale. So those industries never returned in health to the United States. With the only exception to returned at all is Micron with DRAMs.
So what were those 5?
Let's see if I remember them right. So DRAMs, Intel was almost destroyed. Steel, especially steel. Video recorders, video cameras, two kind of different things, and televisions. We made a lot of TVs until that happened, right? So they went to Japan, and they have been making money on them really effectively. They're very good at manufacturing. They're very good at incremental improvement, quality control. We all know how great they are. The Japanese are geniuses at this stuff, and they're still making a lot of money, more money than ever. We're about to publish a book on Japan talking about how well they did at a time when everybody else in the media is talking about how poorly they've done. We think they've done really, really well with a different model than we have. We're going to judge them by their model, not by our model. So then South Korea came along and said, that was impressive. 10 or 20 years, you got rich. Let's do the same thing. So what they did the bank shot. They went after the same 5 things in Japan that Japan had taken from us. And in very short order, they had them. And I'm not mentioning cars because everybody kind of has cars, but cars is part of the story in a different way. So all those things moved to South Korea, and South Korea then became the world leader in all those things. It's amazing stuff, you know. The model really works well.
So INVNT, you started, 2 years ago?
4.
4 years ago, and you've been working really, really hard
Yep.
to raise awareness. And 2 weeks ago, something big happened. Why don't you
Right.
talk about that?
So we had been working with the White House for about 3 years, literally with almost every part of the government, most of the executive branch, so the State Department, NSA, all these different guys. And the White House suddenly, we didn't know it was going to happen. I was on my way, I was flying to D.C. to help this kind of thing happen, and the president on the 1st of April put out a presidential order. You probably all saw it. Excuse me. And if I could have written it myself, I mean, it was the best thing I've ever seen on solving this problem. It literally says, we will identify the miscreants here. We will punish them economically. And there are no restraints. We're going to call it a national crisis. When it happens, they won't be able to travel. We're going to freeze all their assets. We're going to sanction them with, financially. They can't trade with anybody. They can't sell in the United States. No one can help them. Everyone gets penalized who touches them. Okay, that works for me. So it's an economic response instead of naming and blaming or whining or firing bullets or whatever else you want to do.
2 weeks ago.
The 1st of April. Easy to Google it, and it's called the Presidential Directive or the Presidential Order.
So we're talking about being secure, and there is, Bob over here, your one poster
My new
child,
friend.
has been dealing with this for quite some time. But one of the technologies that John's been dealing with is remoting, and that is pushing pixels. Rather than leaving everything on my own corporate internal cloud, and then having my suppliers just see the pixels on their screen, but everything remains in the office local to me.
Right.
What's your thought on that mode of security?
Well, I'll tell you a little story. So there's a company, I won't name the company, on the East Coast who was doing this. And there was a very entrepreneurial worker there who realized that he could hire Chinese guys to come in as him using the VPN, the virtual private network, and he could get like 4 guys for his pay, or vice versa. He could get 4 times the pay he was getting by hiring 4 guys from China, which he did. So he surreptitiously gave access to these 4 unknown guys from China to the deepest part of their network so they could have access and do the jobs he was supposed to be doing. And this went on for a while. So it's hard to maintain integrity in that kind of remoting situation.
So now we're going to go back to my list.
Right.
Your bio, the short version.
Yeah, the short part. Yeah.
Mentions resonance theory in physics. Yeah. What the hell is that?
So it's a theory that I wrote when I was about 24. And came up with some frustrations when I was at Stanford studying physics. I thought it was embarrassing, the kind of stuff they were teaching. And there were some very big problems that had arisen that were just driving me nuts. So I sat down, quit my job, worked at home for 3 years, Here's the fun part. I got a big piece of butcher, like 150 yards of butcher paper, which I ended up getting 3 of those, and colored, pens, and my dining room table, which was about 8 feet wide or more, and I could run this thing back and forward. It was better than a computer, and see all this stuff at once, right? And then look for patterns. And the beauty here, I think, for the use of the folks in the room is, I have spent my whole life, my adult life, training myself to be better at seeing patterns, which is the secret, if there's a secret sauce here, to why I'm good at predicting things in the future. So this was early in that process. And I wanted to go back at physics from scratch, brand new batch of dough, and say, let's say you knew nothing about physics, but you had good access to libraries, and you could look at all the mathematics for all the force laws, put them up here in different colors, and find things that are shared, and see if there isn't, in fact, a mathematics that comes out at you, emerges, right, that is shared. And I ended up finding it. And then I put it on a Commodore 64 as one algorithm with all the UIs for 7 or 13 different fields of physics. So you could say, I'm interested in special relativity, or I'm interested in the electromagnetic force law. Whatever it was, you just plug it in, and then out comes the answer, right? But it was only one piece of math. And then I went to some guys who were very good physicists to double check this, and they agreed that it worked. So that started the work. And the real work had to do with light and with space. And resonance theory was a discovery that instead of looking at all this particle zoo crap, people should be looking at space. And I called it Einstein's biggest mistake when he stopped doing that. He looked at the ether thing, which he later said was true. And so if you only look at empty space, it has characteristics. It has the capability of being resonant. And the result is you understand all the laws of physics come out of that naturally.
So basically a string-like theory.
Yes. So the first paper had a string in it showing the relationship of space itself to the things we know.
One of the things that you got a lot of notoriety about was your prediction on television well in advance of the 2007-2008 financial collapse. What led you to that prediction?
I was in London, and I'd hired a PR firm to do the week, and I was going to do this power lunch thing, and we were talking about Greenspan. Mm-hmm. During my time there, I was having breakfast, and on I think it was 27th of February, sometime around then, all of the world equity markets dropped by about 1-3% at the same moment, same day. Now, normal people wouldn't notice that, right? But it's kind of like we're all used to our markets going down individually. But it's like if the ocean went down a foot everywhere. How could that happen, right? So that's what happened financially. Is all these equity things went. Well, where'd the water go? So what that meant to me was, for some reason that wasn't being described, the world's smartest investors had an oh shit moment, and decided to pull their money out of the markets. But there wasn't any hit. No one got killed. There was no assassination. There was nothing in the news that would have caused that. So I kept reading the paper. What happened that day? What did they see that I missed? And there was nothing. I mean, there are these China changed a rule on banking. That wasn't it. So what was it? And the FT caught part of it, but they didn't get the whole thing. So they were looking too.
FT, Financial Times.
And I won't go through the whole story, but that was the trigger. I knew that there had to be something behind that pattern that was gigantic. And when I figured out what it was really interesting. It was about Japan and some other things. But what happened was, and no one knew this at the time, the world global liquidity, the amount of liquidity and money in the world had just doubled over 5 years. It had gone from 36 trillion to 72 trillion.
It hit the trigger point.
Well, the thing that happened that made these guys scared was that there was a newbie as the head of the Bank of Japan who unannounced, never do this, no one ever does this, unannounced scared the world's investor community who had been running money through Japan because they had a 0% interest rate. So it's called a carry trade. You get free money on a loan, you go buy something for 5%, you get rich. And when he suddenly raised the interest rates, they were like, who's this guy? He didn't announce anything, he didn't warn us, and it could go anywhere. He might be crazy. Maybe it's going to go to 5 tomorrow, 0.5. So we better get out. We have to go into cash, and to go into cash, did it come back through Japan? So it's a long story. I've just finished a book about this, but yeah, it was not obvious, but it was really important. And the result was you got a little vision, a little view of how much hot money there was in the world markets. Hot money, meaning easy to move around, right? Mm-hmm. And it had just doubled over, and no one knew that. Everyone was talking about real estate's going up and everything's going up, right? The reason stuff was going up. People who say, oh, I called the crisis. No, they called the real estate thing or something like that. They just saw a little part of the elephant. But the real problem was there was too much money. Literally too much hot money. And it was inflating prices everywhere. So that was...
So too much money. We talked at breakfast about the poker game. Mm-hmm. About the fact that since that crisis hit, all of the countries have been printing money. Then somebody decided not to play that game. You want to give a few words about that?
Sure.
And its current net result that we talked about.
When I was looking at Japan, I thought, wow, this is crazy. You've got a country that's cheating. Cheating. It's like you're playing poker and someone's just constantly making new chips. They're manipulating their currency to allow their exporters to beat our guys on a daily basis, and no one's doing anything about it. I think the answer was they were our partner, we just ignored it. But it was a very effective thing. No one wants to compete with that kind of problem. Well, then South Korea picked it up. It's the model thing. And then China picked it up. Well, China's a big country. When China does something, the swimming pool is emptied, right? So they started doing this peg thing where they're, unlike the Japanese, they're coming in like daily. They're coming in all the time. They've stated what they want, and they're going to keep it no matter what happens. So they've locked us into a kind of a grip, and then they get the 40% discount on all their goods. So when China trades now with somebody else, take Brazil for them, the first year of that trading relationship, the Brazilian real lost 34% of its value. No, gained 34% of its value against China. So this is the result of what happens to each partner in a trading relationship with an infomercantilist model, with a country from that model. And in every case, it puts your currency at a disadvantage, and that has pretty horrible consequences.
The strong currency.
Yeah. You become strong, they become weak. They're always weak.
But
they want to have
your
it cheap.
goods are, they can, your goods are
their goods are cheap, your goods are expensive on the world market. Huawei prices at 40% off. Everybody else in that business prices within 5%. They all lost their shirts. So that's how it works. And every country in a row all the trading partners started doing the same thing because they had no choice. Today, we call it currency wars. Because today, I think every country that I could think, everyone that matters, Germany, everyone that matters is doing this except us.
Printing money.
Well, they're doing one of two things. At first, it was manipulating currency by intervening in the forex market. That was the original thing. Then it was printing money to do the same thing. And then it was what they called quantitative easing, which is you buy your own debt to achieve the same end. They all have the same intention, which is to debase your money. And we just stopped about, 6 months ago or something. So now you read all these stories in the media about the strong dollar. That's what happens when the poker game is still going on. There's one guy who said, I'm not going to cheat anymore. And the result is your currency gets to be very strong.
What led you to see the price drop in oil? And what is, you made some statements about the fact that oil, we're not going to see the oil prices that we've seen before, and the relationship or what's happened to OPEC.
Right. So I've been tracking oil pricing for a long time. I did a pretty good job of predicting price increases on the way up. And I have a benefit because my dad worked for an oil company. He wasn't an oil guy, but he's a venture guy. So I've been watching them for a long time. And you realize that the oil game is a game. It's not really about the amount of oil on the ground. It's really much more about control, price control. And that's what OPEC's all about. So we got to a point where a number of things converged, which suddenly blew up the game. And I'm really proud of this call because it was like $93 or something. If you look at the chart, it had been doing that for a long time, maybe 10 years. And so to make the call then was a good thing to do. And what happened was, of course, maybe three things. One was fracking, and that's the biggest. The fracking gas, fracking oil. Another was this BS about peak oil. I think within an hour of that thing, I called that off. And the idea behind peak oil was technology will not be able to help us in a demonstrable big way to get more oil. Well, that was wrong. So we immediately started doing deep drilling in oceans. Oh, that's technology, you know, so that was goofy. The result of this is you get a huge amount of new oil finds. We're still making them daily. Britain just got a new one last week. There's just oil everywhere. There'll be enough oil for us to do oil forever. And gas. Everyone's got gas now. You know, it's amazing, isn't it? And then there's alternative energy. So guess what? Global warming is not a small thing. We're committing suicide as a planet, and it's a pretty big deal. So Germany and other countries are ramping the heck out of alternative sources. It's not going to go away. These things are not small things. They're gigantic. And they're so gigantic that that's why I made the call, that it was time. There was no way to resist this, right? And the OPEC couldn't do it. And the Saudis are really smart. So I also figured probably they wouldn't fight it because they couldn't fight it. And the only thing that would happen, they'd look like losers. And the Saudi family does not enjoy looking like losers. So they wouldn't even get involved, which they didn't. So you just have this precipitous off-the-cliff price drop that happened. Yeah.
And it's not coming back.
It's not coming back.
So in the last 3 minutes of our part,
right.
What else are you seeing on the horizon that we should be paying attention to?
Well, there are a lot of things.
I warned you.
Yeah, okay. Well, there are a lot of things that are fun things, you know. Okay, here's one. This is my little pet project. If you wanted to solve the global warming thing without too much pain and make money at the same time, you'd stop all the lobbying efforts from the fossil fuel guys who have prevented us from talking about this properly. You'd make them your business partners. I call this the Trifecta proposal. So you go to Peabody Coal and all these guys who are ExxonMobil, and you say, here's the deal. You can keep doing whatever you're doing for a while, but you have to invest in graphene production facilities at your sites. And then we'll take all the CO2, 100% of the CO2 out of your...
Just graphene.
So graphene is the world's most amazing material. Probably you all know what it is. It's one atom thick in its basic description. It's 100 or 1,000 times stronger than steel. It's got more crazy, beautiful characteristics in terms of electrical conduction and thermal properties. It's amazing. Everything in this room, with no exceptions, could be made from graphene, except the people who are made from carbon. So, you know, it's amazing. And why not take what you know about graphene, make it out of CO2, and make a commercial benefit out of it, and make these guys your partners instead of your enemies, stop arguing all day long, and fix the damn problem. So that's the idea. And then the question is, well, fine, but there's no demand for graphene. Okay, let's solve that problem. And that's the third part. So it turns out that we have a different problem, which is we've got 3D printing, and we don't know where to go with it. It's this really cool toy. Everybody likes it in the maker movement, but in fact, it's kind of a joke. But what if we could turn it into something industrial strength, right? Really serious? Well, how would you do that? It's got a limit because you can only do like 1 jet, 2 jets, 3 jets. That's never going to go anywhere. But if it turned out that materials didn't matter, you only need one material, you're playing straight into the weakness of inkjet printing, of 3D printing. So why not do that? So now people are doing that. There are now conferences on 3D graphene printing. I think we helped create one of those. So if you could put those 3 things together, guess what you've got? You've got a sustainable global materials story instead of exhaust resources. It's totally reusable. You get tired of your sweater, you shred it and make it into a Boeing airplane, right? Forever. This stuff never breaks. I mean, and then you've got the CO2 thing solved. You're done with the global warming story. Can you imagine if you could, like every leader in the world, for commercial reasons, right, could say, and China included, I'm just going to turn off all CO2 from all smokestacks today. Wow, that would change our agenda. We could focus on some other stuff then.
Because we're collecting the CO2 to use
100%.
it to
It's a commercial good. It's not a waste product. We're going to make graphene out of it. We're all going to get rich as kings.
Okay. With that, I'm going to open the floor to questions.
Great talk. Thank you very much. I really like it. I'm curious about protecting yourself. You talked about an air gap, and I was wondering what is your attitude, philosophy with regard to honeypots?
Speak up again. Oh, and what was the first part? Protecting yourself from? Protecting yourself from?
From attacks. And you said you
honeypots.
advise putting in an air gap.
Honeypots are good. There are some people, I think, in D.C. who think that that's the answer, or it's one of the current answers.
Okay, describe what a honeypot is for those.
Oh,
that
sorry.
don't.
So World War II, we did a lot of this, and so if you have a situation where someone's trying to spy on you, if you give them false information, and they don't know which is false and which is not, it really gives them a bad day. So they can steal the other 90%, but they don't know which 10% is real, and therefore it's a legitimate strategy to create. There are two things. Honeypots themselves are just intended to be measurements of external cyber attack. But if you put things in the honeypots that are intended to be digested and taken back home, which are fake, like fake blueprints.
There's another really interesting technique, and that is for, well, let's use passwords for an example. When you enter the wrong password, it doesn't reject it. It accepts it, but puts you into a database that has misleading information.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Same exact thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good technique. People are reluctant to do it in corporations, and that's the primary barrier to having it. Yes.
Yeah. Are you recommending honeypots?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Next question.
The last night we were talking about one aspect of it, and that is, I come at things from a different angle, and that is the way in which the Chinese, and earlier the Japanese, they morally justify to themselves, because everybody wants to feel good about themselves. Mm-hmm. They morally justify what they're doing as getting compensation for colonialism, mm-hmm. and they were abused by a number of Western powers for a while, even though they were terrible colonialists and dominated their periphery, and now we see that happening in the South China Sea. But it occurred to me during our conversation that in the 4,500 years of Chinese history, they never had a foreign friend except one. Mm. And that foreign friend came in without any need for their own self and helped them on 5 different occasions and hurt them on 1 or 2 occasions. Mm. And that one foreign friend was the United States of America,
right.
Across 4,500 years. And the other aspect I'd like you to comment on is the business of the self-interest, whether or not they're smart enough to realize that we're the goose that lays their golden egg. We buy trillions of dollars worth of crap and lift them up, but we have to be able to invent in order to pay that balance of payments.
So let me just agree with the first thing you said, and I thought it was a very interesting point you made last night. We were with someone who's an old China hand who was quite quiet while you were describing all that. The second part, unfortunately, no. So another way to say this is, because the only response to this kind of behavior or model is an economic response, that's what they hear. They will hear it that way. They have to have us as a market or nothing works. If we were willing to use that, which we're now starting to get to, I think, with the presidential order, if we're willing to use the control that we have, obviously, that you just described, then they listen. But they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts or their long-term planning. They would just as soon take everything and just rough it after that. So unfortunately, they're not wise enough to do what you're saying, but they do listen to the economic effects.
Chris?
Yeah, thanks. So you were talking about Huawei earlier as an example of the state-sponsored taking of IP. But it seems like we are also enabling that. There are virtually no restrictions on buying their goods.
Yes, there are.
There are some.
Yes.
But the defense has some restrictions in place. Selling to Huawei, they're a huge PTC customer. They have analysis software. How do we address at an individual or a national level the companies that are doing the state sponsored?
So this is a good question. So when I was getting ready to go to D.C. last week, this is just when the presidential order came out, and it kind of overran us. We're kind of ramping up. I'm calling Michael Daniel at the White House, and suddenly here's this press conference, and he's standing there, and the president's there, and they're doing this thing, right? And it's like, wait a minute, we have to rejigger. We have to rethink that. What are we doing? Why are we going to D.C.? Because it's done. We've just achieved the goal that we've been working on for the last 4 years. And we're going to go to the Congress. Well, why would we go to the Congress? It's done. So I think the real answer to your question is, will they use the order? Will they enforce it? Because if they use that order in the description of what we're okay. If a company receives stolen goods, no American company can trade with it. Okay, Huawei. Now, will they enforce it? We'll see.
And that's the hard part. How do we make sure that executive order actually gets enforced? That's
Exactly.
the next job.
That is our next job.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of documentation of thefts, and we're happy to share that with the White House.
So where were you yesterday?
2 days ago, I was giving the keynote speech for the NGA annual meeting called the Grand.
National Geospatial Agency. It's a small little building.
The National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, the least well-known of our three-letter guys, I think, the second largest building in Washington, D.C. after the Pentagon. 75 people working there every day, 7,500. And they are the guys and women whose job is to analyze images for all the satellite work worldwide that NRO does, everybody else does.
Jack? Yeah.
Thank you. You've described the game between nation states. Is there a similar game between ideological groups?
Do you want to be more specific than that?
You talking about politically?
You mean Islam, or what are we talking about? Sure. It's a different model, but sure. And I guess, when you look at this from the perspective of structures and patterns, it's not about whose God do you love or something. It's just about what's more effective and how does it work. It could be Cub Scouts versus Girl Scouts, but how does it work? And it's a really good system when you murder all the people who don't like what you like, because they tend to all go to your side at that point. So there are some basic rules that are making this a very rapid expansion. It is the most rapidly expanding religion today.
John?
So I just want to give you a data point, and I don't know if you're aware of this or not, and then get your reaction to it, but the United States just prohibited Intel from shipping 80,000 high-end processors to China.
Thank
China
goodness. Right?
Yeah. Well, now hang on. There's a part B of this. So they did that to prevent China from building the next generation supercomputer, which would have propelled China ahead, which also would have helped China build nuclear bombs and airplanes and so forth. Simultaneously, the U.S. government awarded Intel a supercomputer project with 128,000 processors in it.
Yes, I was aware of that.
Fred? Wait, 1 second. Fred, are you in the room? Oh, you want to say anything about that? So Fred is the chief scientist for Lawrence Berkeley National Labs.
Actually, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which is why I have to be careful. That decision is a lot more complicated than it looks. So first of all, the contract that was let for Argonne, those two are not related, because that was a long time coming. That was done. The decision not to sell chips to China is complicated because they're going to make their own now, and there is a line of thinking that would have said it's better actually to give them ours now. Because they are making all their own equipment. They have an almost completely set up indigenous ability to make supercomputers. And yes, they are using that to design stealth warships and nuclear weapons and everything that we use our computers for. So that's a real problem.
So Fred's right. And there is a debate about that question. But it's also true that we don't pay enough attention. And so I was glad to see that happen. We had a situation. I was asked to brief the Pentagon about 3 years ago on what new technologies might show up from left field that would. And so for 2 hours or 3 hours, we're talking about stuff. And then in that room was one of the people. So I said, you realize that IBM just gave its most advanced technology for chips to China, to mainland China. You know that. And they said, yeah, we approved it. One of the guys in this room approved it for CFIUS. CFIUS is the group that. And I said, may I be impolite? And
Sure.
Said, yeah. And I used the F-bomb. I said, what the F were you thinking? Here you're trying to ask me like how to use garbage lids to make, it's like, and you're giving them the most advanced processing in the world, and you think that's not going to affect their technology for weaponry. And they said, Commerce made us do it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. Made us generals do it, you know. So we have been too lax on this score, I think.
So.
Thanks, Mark. It's a fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
A quick question. Data is on Dropboxes of the world. We put our data on Amazon, cloud, everywhere. How do you create air gaps when you move IP to these locations?
When you move to the cloud?
Yeah.
You don't. You don't. And so really big issue right now is cloud security. And the best kept secret on the corporate side of the world probably is the cloud secure. If I don't know if you have Amazon guys here today. Probably not.
They were supposed to be here, but they didn't show up.
Okay. So we'll talk about Amazon behind their back. My opinion is they've been hacked already. And that's just not my opinion, it's other people's opinion. So if you're the CSO or the CEO of a company and you're considering using cloud, fine, go ahead. Put the payroll on it if you consider that to be not important, or put things on it that, whatever you think really doesn't matter, go ahead. But don't put your crown jewels in the cloud.
So
that'll just be insane.
Here's a contrary statement to that.
Yeah, I know. The cloud's safer than your own system.
So which is better, doing it yourself poorly, or letting them do it better than you?
Yeah. I think doing it yourself well is the answer.
But
because the other ones, here's the problem, Brad. So I'm sitting with the guy who was running MI5, Sir Ian Lobban. We're in Britain. He's bragging about a really cool program that was better than ours, with business working with the government, with GCHQ and MI5, and they're going to work together. He says, this is going to solve 80 or 90% of our cybersecurity problems. And I said, that's terrific. There's only one problem with that. It's 0% effective for crown jewel. And that's the only thing that matters. So congratulations on coming up with a solution which is completely ineffective for the only thing that matters. Don't pat yourself too hard in the back, right? And that's the problem here, is you're saying, do you want to do something bad or something bad? Don't do bad things. Do something good. So if you're a little company, it's a smaller shoebox. Doesn't mean don't do it. Do it. You can be just as safe as Israel, right? Israel's pretty good at this stuff. Just do that. Do the right thing.
Okay, we're going to take one more question from David, and then I have a final question for you, and then we're going to move on to our next one. So, David?
Yeah, if you look at the big picture of what you're saying here, yes, security, prevent them from getting our crown jewels, learn to fight back, learn to create disincentives. I even raised a moral disincentive that I agree is weak, but over the long run might have some effect. But there's the other way of looking at this, and that is, if we're the inventing nations, supply side on this, keep our supply of inventions faster than they can steal them. And that is what we have been doing.
No, I'm sorry, it doesn't work.
Well, to some extent.
I'm sorry.
In that we create children,
David,
young people who invent fast.
You and I are both pro-invention, so I get that part, but it doesn't work. Those models don't do what you say. You can't outrun the bear. You can outrun the other guy, but you can't outrun the bear. There is no way to invent fast enough. It's hard to invent great things. You know that. So you invent the internet. It's 20 years later. It's pretty good. Everything takes 20 years. It takes 8 minutes to steal something or less. You can't outrun this. If that's your philosophy, you will die. So we've got to have a philosophy that says, let's all be inventors. That's where I thought you were going. If we could somehow incent these countries, all three of these countries, to become more and more inventive, that'd be great. They claim they want to do it, but learning to be, you don't learn to be Einstein by robbing banks. It doesn't get you there. It's not on a track somehow. So if they were on a track, really, to start becoming better and better at inventing things, that'd be good for everybody. But you can't just outrun them. I'm sorry.
Okay, we are just about out of time, and I have one last quick question. So within a minute. So one of the things that I try to do with our Saturday keynotes is to give our attendees some key business takeaways. In the next 60 seconds, what's the one or two key things you want them to walk away with?
Well, I've already done it, so I'll just underline it again.
Yeah.
If you guys take this talk seriously, and if you end up agreeing with me that this is how the world works today, and if you recognize that your company, whoever you are, has these secrets, and if you make a new decision with new energy at management level to protect these things, that alone is a win, and everybody will be better off from our time together. And then if you join INVNT, you'll help us solve this whole world thing, and it'll go away. So
also, I highly recommend Strategic News Service, which is Mark's publication. I am a subscriber, and Mark has an event called Future in Review, which I attend, and David Brin attends. And it's not this; it's different, but it's excellent.
Yeah, love
and
to have you.
Can I have a round of applause for David?
Mark.
For Mark.
And my friend Paul here.
And for David.
Thank you.